The dust billowed around Margaret Kearney's skirts as she stepped off the Union Pacific train, the harsh Montana sunlight momentarily blinding her after the dim interior of the passenger car. Her heart sank as she squinted at the weathered station sign Willowcreek, Montana. This wasn't Utica. This wasn't where her brother was waiting. Final stop until tomorrow morning, folks, the conductor called, already helping the next passenger down the steps. Margaret clutched her valise tighter, her stomach knotting with anxiety. "Sir, there's been a mistake. I purchased a ticket to Utica." The conductor barely glanced at her ticket before shaking his head. "That's another 80 miles west, madam. This here's the last stop today. Engine's got troubles and needs repairs." "But my brother is waiting for me in Utica," she protested, her voice rising. "I have nowhere to stay here." The conductor tipped his hat. "Sorry, miss. Hotel's just down the main street. You can catch tomorrow's train at noon if we get the repairs done." Margaret stood frozen as the conductor moved on, leaving her alone on the platform as other passengers dispersed. The station was little more than a wooden platform with a small ticket office, now closed for the day. The September sun beat down relentlessly, and she could already feel perspiration gathering at her neckline despite the cooling temperatures of early fall. She had traveled all the way from Boston with precise plans that now lay in ruins at her feet like the dust swirling around her hem. 23 years old and alone in a strange town, with night approaching and no telegram possible to alert her brother of the delay. As she stood contemplating her limited options, the sound of hoofbeats approached from behind. Margaret turned to see a rider on a chestnut quarter horse drawing up beside the platform. The man was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His well-worn Stetson was pulled low, casting shadows across features that might have been carved from stone. "Train troubles?" he asked, voice deep and smooth like aged whiskey. Margaret nodded, clutching her valise. "I'm meant to be in Utica. This is not where I'm supposed to be." The stranger's gaze was steady, assessing. "Utica's a fair piece from here." He shifted in his saddle, studying her for a moment. "I'm headed that way myself. I'll take you there." "I beg your pardon," Margaret stared, uncertain she'd heard correctly. "Name's Adam Adler." "My ranch is just outside Utica. I can get you there before midnight if we ride steady." He gestured to his horse. "Thunder here can carry us both." Margaret hesitated, her mind racing through proper etiquette and the dangers of traveling alone with a stranger versus spending the night in an unfamiliar town. "That's very kind, Mr. Adler, but you got family waiting in Utica," he interrupted. "My brother, yes." "He'll be worried when I don't arrive." Adam nodded once. "Then it's settled. Can't have your brother worried all night when I can get you there." He extended his hand down to her. "I give you my word as a gentleman, Miss Kearney, Margaret Kearney, Miss Kearney. I give you my word you'll reach Utica safely." There was something in those blue eyes, a steadfastness, an honesty that Margaret couldn't dismiss. She'd grown up reading her father's books about the West, about codes of honor among frontiersmen that were as binding as any written law. This man, with his weathered face and calloused hands, seemed to embody that code. With a deep breath, Margaret placed her gloved hand in his. "Thank you, Mr. Adler. I accept your offer." His grip was firm as he helped her mount behind him, her skirts arranging awkwardly across the horse's back. Adam secured her small valise to the saddle. "You'll want to hold on, Miss Kearney," he said, and Margaret tentatively placed her hands on his sides. "Tighter than that. We've got ground to cover." Swallowing her pride and propriety, Margaret wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his cotton shirt and vest. The horse moved beneath them, powerful and sure-footed, and they were off, leaving the small station of Willowcreek behind. "What brings you to Montana territory, Miss Kearney?" Adam asked as they rode past the last buildings of the small town and onto the trail heading west. "My brother Patrick homesteaded near Utica 3 years ago. Our parents passed last winter, and he's the only family I have left." Margaret's voice caught slightly. "He wrote that Montana needs teachers, and I've been teaching in Boston for 2 years. Adam nodded. "He's right about that. Children here grow up fast with little schooling. Town council's been trying to establish a proper school in Utica for a year now. The landscape opened before them, rolling hills covered in golden grass, distant mountains purple against the sky, and occasional stands of cottonwoods marking creek beds. Despite her fatigue from days of travel, Margaret couldn't help but be awed by the vastness of it all, so different from the crowded streets of Boston. "It's beautiful," she murmured, almost to herself. "Gets in your blood," Adam replied. "Different kind of beauty than back east, I reckon." "You've been east," Philadelphia, before the war, went to university there. Margaret's surprise must have been evident in her slight stiffening as Adam chuckled. "Cowboys can read books too, Miss Kearney." "I didn't mean to imply, no offense taken. Most folks out here don't expect it." He guided the horse around a rocky outcropping. "War changed everything, came west afterward like a lot of men, found a new start." The sun began its descent as they rode, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Margaret's muscles ached from maintaining her position, but she found herself growing accustomed to the rhythm of the horse's gait, to the steady presence of the man before her. "We'll stop briefly at Freeman's Creek to water the horse," Adam said after they'd been riding for nearly 2 hours. "Give you a chance to stretch your legs." The creek was a ribbon of silver in the fading light, cottonwoods rustling above it in the evening breeze. Adam dismounted in one fluid motion, then reached up to help Margaret down. Her legs trembled as they took her weight, and his hands remained at her waist a moment longer than necessary to ensure she was steady. "Thank you," she said, stepping back and straightening her skirts. Her hair had come partially loose from its pins during the ride, and she reached up to tuck stray strands behind her ear. Adam led Thunder to the creek's edge, allowing the horse to drink. "There's some jerky in my saddlebag if you're hungry," he offered, gesturing to the leather pouches. Margaret realized she hadn't eaten since a light breakfast on the train. "That would be appreciated, thank you." While Adam tended to his horse, Margaret retrieved the jerky, finding a clean handkerchief to place it on. She also discovered a canteen and took a grateful sip of water. "Your brother's place," Adam said as he rejoined her. "What's it called?" "Emerald Hills. He named it after our mother's birthplace in Ireland." Adam nodded. "Know it. Good land, about 3 miles north of town. Patrick Kearney's got a solid reputation, fair trader, hard worker." Relief washed over Margaret. "You know Patrick?" "Not well, but in these parts you get to know of most folks. Traded for some of his hay last winter when my supply ran short." Adam accepted the jerky she offered him. He mentioned a sister back east once. Said she had more book learning than the governor. Margaret smiled, the first genuine smile since stepping off the train. "That sounds like Patrick. He always exaggerated my modest accomplishments." "Teaching ain't modest work," Adam said seriously. "Takes courage and patience both." They ate in companionable silence as twilight deepened around them. Margaret was struck by how comfortable she felt in this stranger's presence, miles from anywhere, with only the sounds of the creek and distant coyotes for company. "We should move on," Adam finally said, packing away the remains of their simple meal. "Still have a good distance to cover." Getting back on the horse proved easier the second time, though Margaret was acutely aware of the impropriety of their closeness as she once again wrapped her arms around Adam's waist. But such concerns seemed distant and trivial beneath the vast canopy of stars that emerged as darkness claimed the sky. They rode in silence for a while, the horse's steady pace eating up the miles. Margaret found herself fighting fatigue, her head occasionally drooping forward to rest against Adam's back before she caught herself. "You can rest," he said softly. "I won't let you fall." Too tired to protest, Margaret allowed herself to lean against him, drawing warmth from his solid presence as the night air grew cooler. She drifted in and out of awareness, lulled by the horse's movement. She wasn't sure how much time had passed when Adam spoke again. "Tell me about Boston, Miss Kearney." Margaret straightened slightly. "It's changed since the war, everything has." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "My father was a professor at Harvard. Our home was always filled with books and ideas and debates. After he died, I couldn't stay there. Too many memories. Loss has a way of making homes into ghosts, Adam said quietly. Yes, Margaret whispered, surprised by his perceptiveness. Exactly that. What did you teach in Boston? Literature and mathematics at a girls' academy, though I much preferred the literature. She smiled in the darkness. Mathematics has too many rigid answers. Literature asks questions that have no single answer. Adam was silent for a moment. Like what? Like whether Hamlet truly loved Ophelia, or if Captain Ahab's obsession was madness or purpose. Or why people search their whole lives for something they can't name. The trail narrowed as they entered a pass between two hillsides. Adam guided the horse carefully through the shadows. And what are you searching for, Miss Kearney? He asked. The question hung in the night air, unexpectedly intimate. Margaret found herself answering with an honesty that surprised her. A place where I belong, where I can do good work and not feel like I'm only half living. She took a breath. Patrick writes that Montana is still being shaped, that it needs people who believe in building something lasting. I want to be part of that. Adam nodded, and she felt the movement through her hands at his waist. Montana has a way of testing folks. Whether distance, hardship, it drives some away and makes others put down roots so deep they become part of the land. And which are you, Mr. Adler? She felt a slight chuckle rumble through his chest. Rooted, Miss Kearney, very much rooted. They emerged from the pass into a broad valley, and in the distance, Margaret could see scattered lights, the first sign of their destination. Utica, Adam confirmed, following her gaze. We'll be there in under an hour. As they drew closer to town, Margaret found herself with mixed feelings: relief at reaching her destination safely, but also a curious reluctance to end this unexpected journey with Adam Adler. He was unlike any man she'd met in Boston, straightforward yet thoughtful, rugged yet gentle in his manners. The town of Utica appeared first as a collection of lamplight, then gradually took shape as buildings, wooden structures lining a main street, a church steeple silhouetted against the night sky. It was smaller than she'd imagined from Patrick's letters, but there was something welcoming about its nestled presence in the valley. Your brother's place is north of town, Adam said, guiding Thunder past the darkened storefronts. But at this hour, he might be at the Silverton Hotel. Cowboys and ranchers often gather there in the evenings. Then perhaps we should check there first, Margaret suggested, anxiety returning at the thought of arriving unannounced at her brother's homestead in the middle of the night. Adam nodded and directed the horse toward a two-story building with windows still glowing with light. Music and the murmur of voices drifted out into the night. As they drew up to the hitching post, Margaret became suddenly aware of her appearance: travel-worn, hair half fallen, and surely bearing the dust of their journey. It was hardly the arrival she'd envisioned when leaving Boston, but there was nothing to be done about it now. Adam dismounted and helped her down, her legs stiff from the hours in the saddle. Wait here a moment, he said, tying Thunder securely. Let me make sure your brother's inside before you have to face a room full of cowboys. Margaret nodded gratefully, watching as Adam adjusted his hat and strode into the hotel. Left alone in the quiet street, she attempted to repair her appearance, smoothing her skirts and re-pinning her hair as best she could without a mirror. Minutes later, the door burst open, and a tall man with the same auburn hair as her own rushed out, his face breaking into a wide smile. Maggie. Patrick Kearney exclaimed, crossing the distance between them in 3 long strides and sweeping her into a bear hug that lifted her feet off the ground. What in heaven's name? I was about to ride to the station when they said the train had mechanical troubles. Margaret found herself laughing and crying at once as her brother set her down. I got off at the wrong station, Willowcreek. If not for Mr. Adler's kindness in bringing me here, I'd still be stranded there. Patrick turned to Adam, who had followed him out at a more measured pace. Adler, he said, extending his hand. I owe you a debt I can't repay. My sister is all the family I have left. Adam shook Patrick's hand firmly. No debt, anyone would have done the same. Not anyone, Margaret said softly, meeting Adam's eyes. Thank you. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the unusual bond forged during their journey. You must be exhausted, Patrick said, turning back to Margaret. "I've got a wagon out back. We'll get you home and settled." Margaret nodded, suddenly aware of her bone-deep weariness. "Yes, I'd like that." Patrick went to fetch his wagon, leaving Margaret and Adam standing in the pool of light spilling from the hotel's windows. "Well, Miss Kearney," Adam said, his voice low, "you've reached your destination safely, as promised." "Thanks to you," she replied. "I hope our paths cross again, Mr. Adler." A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "In a town this size, that's all but certain." He hesitated, then added, "The town council meets Tuesday evenings at the schoolhouse such as it is. If you're interested in teaching here, it might be worth attending." Before Margaret could respond, Patrick returned with the wagon. Adam helped transfer her valise and then assisted her onto the wooden seat beside her brother. "Good night, Miss Kearney," Adam said, tipping his hat. "Welcome to Utica." As the wagon pulled away, Margaret looked back to see Adam Adler still standing in the street, watching them go, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. "So," Patrick said as they headed out of town, "that's Adam Adler. Owner of the Double A Ranch and about as respected a man as you'll find in these parts. He was very kind to bring me all this way." Patrick glanced at her. "Must have made quite an impression. Adler's known for keeping to himself mostly, except for town business." Margaret felt a warmth in her cheeks and was grateful for the darkness. "We had several hours of riding. Conversation helped pass the time." Patrick chuckled. "Well, little sister, you've certainly made an entrance to Utica. Wait till folks hear how you arrived riding double with Adam Adler, of all people." "Patrick, you make it sound scandalous." "Not scandalous," he corrected, "just unexpected. Especially for a Boston-educated lady teacher," Margaret sighed. "I'm beginning to think Montana will require me to adjust many of my expectations." "That it will, Maggie," Patrick agreed, his voice softening, "but I think you'll find it's worth it." As they approached the homestead, a sturdy log cabin with a smaller structure beside it that Patrick explained was to be her quarters, Margaret felt both exhaustion and anticipation. This new chapter of her life had begun in the most unexpected way possible, with a mistaken train stop and an 8-hour ride with a compelling stranger. She thought of Adam Adler's quiet strength, his unexpected thoughtfulness, the way he spoke of being rooted to this land. And she wondered what Tuesday's town council meeting might bring. Dawn broke over the rolling hills surrounding Emerald Hills homestead, bathing Margaret's small cabin in golden light. She had slept deeply despite the unfamiliar surroundings, exhausted from her journey and the emotional upheaval of the previous day. Now, as she dressed in one of her simpler day dresses, a practical navy blue with minimal bustle, she gazed out the single window at the landscape that was to be her new home. Patrick's homestead was more developed than she'd expected from his letters. The main cabin was solidly built with a stone chimney, and he'd constructed a separate one-room cabin for her that afforded them both privacy. A barn, chicken coop, and corral completed the small complex, with fields of hay stretching to the north. Beyond that, grasslands rolled toward distant mountains, the morning light turning the scene into something from a painting. A knock at her door announced Patrick's presence. "Breakfast's ready when you are, Maggie," he called. "Nothing fancy, mind you." "I'll be right there," she responded, quickly pinning up her hair in a simpler style than she'd worn in Boston. The mirror above her washstand reflected a woman with bright green eyes, fair skin lightly freckled across the nose, and thick auburn hair that refused to stay completely confined. At 23, Margaret was no longer a girl, but neither had she resigned herself to spinsterhood. Despite what some in Boston society might have whispered after her second refused proposal, Patrick had coffee brewing and biscuits warming when she entered the main cabin. Her brother, 5 years her senior, had filled out since she'd last seen him 3 years ago. Farm work had broadened his shoulders and tanned his naturally fair skin, but his easy smile and the mischievous glint in his eyes, so like their father's, remained unchanged. "Hope you still take it with just cream," he said, pouring coffee into a sturdy mug. "Some habits don't change," she smiled, accepting the mug gratefully. "This place, Patrick, it's wonderful. Your letters didn't do it justice." Pride shone in his face. Took a lot of work. First winter was brutal, thought I'd made a terrible mistake, but then spring came and I knew I'd found where I belonged. He gestured for her to sit at the rough-hewn table. Eat up. We've got to head into town later, need supplies, and you should meet some folks. Will the town council be there? Margaret asked, trying to sound casual as she spread butter on a warm biscuit. Patrick raised an eyebrow. Planning your takeover of Utica's education system already, she laughed. Hardly, but Mr. Adler mentioned they've been trying to establish a proper school. That they have. Adler's been the main force behind it, truth be told. Patrick sipped his coffee. He donated the land for the schoolhouse last year, buildings up, but they've had no luck keeping a teacher. Last fellow lasted 2 months before heading back east. Margaret's interest was piqued. Why? Life's hard here, Maggie. Winters are long, comforts are few, and the pay is meager. Plus, some of these ranch kids have never seen the inside of a classroom. Makes for challenging students. Challenging students are often the most rewarding to teach, Margaret replied. And I didn't come west expecting luxury. Patrick studied her for a moment. No, I suppose you didn't. You always did have more backbone than most give you credit for. After breakfast, Margaret explored the homestead while Patrick tended to his morning chores. The air was crisp and clean, filled with scents unfamiliar to her city-bred senses: sage and pine, fresh cut hay, the earthy smell of livestock. A small garden behind the cabin yielded late-season vegetables, and Patrick had planted apple trees that were just beginning to bear fruit. We'll head to town after I finish with the horses, Patrick called from the barn. Thought you might want to see the schoolhouse. Margaret's pulse quickened at the prospect. I'd like that very much. An hour later, they were in Patrick's wagon heading toward Utica. The ride gave Margaret her first clear daylight view of the territory. What had seemed vast and featureless in the darkness now revealed itself as a landscape rich with detail, the varied textures of grasses, the sudden appearance of wildflowers in protected hollows, creeks lined with cottonwoods, and rocky outcroppings that caught the morning light. That's the Double A, Patrick said, pointing to their right where a large ranch house stood in the distance, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. Adler's place, one of the more successful operations around here. Margaret found herself studying the ranch with interest. It looked well maintained even from a distance, with painted buildings and sturdy fencing, signs of prosperity and care in a territory where many simply built for function. How long has he been here? She asked. About 7 years, I think. Came west after the war like many did. Started small but built it up steadily. Patrick glanced at her. Not married, if you're wondering. Patrick, Margaret exclaimed, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. I was merely making conversation. Her brother laughed. Sure you were. Can't blame you for being curious. Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him at one time or another. Never seemed interested, though. Perhaps he's devoted to his ranch, Margaret suggested, trying to sound indifferent. Perhaps, Patrick agreed, but his knowing smile made Margaret turn her attention firmly back to the landscape. Utica by daylight was both more and less than Margaret had expected. The main street was lined with wooden buildings, a general store, the Silverton Hotel with its attached saloon, a small bank, a barber shop, and various other businesses. American flags flew from several porches, and a few attempts at beautification could be seen in window boxes and a small town square with benches beneath cottonwood trees. Patrick pointed out various landmarks as they drove through town. That's Dr. Callahan's place, good doctor, bit fond of whiskey but steady hands when it counts. The Mercantile belongs to the Wilson family, fair prices, and Mrs. Wilson makes the best pies in the county. That building there with the bell tower is our church. Pastor Miller preaches every Sunday. He guided the wagon toward a simple wooden structure at the edge of town. And that's your schoolhouse. The building was plain but solidly constructed, with a small bell tower of its own and large windows to let in natural light. A split-rail fence enclosed a yard that would serve as a playground, though at present it was just packed dirt with a single swing hanging from a sturdy oak. Patrick pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the schoolhouse. Want to look inside? Margaret nodded eagerly, allowing her brother to help her down from the wagon. The schoolhouse door was unlocked, a testament to Utica's trusting nature, or perhaps the fact there was little inside worth stealing. The interior consisted of one large room with rows of rough-hewn benches and desks that could accommodate perhaps 20 students. A larger desk stood at the front of the room, flanked by a black slate board mounted on the wall. A pot-bellied stove occupied one corner, its pipe extending up through the ceiling. "It's simple, but it has the essentials," Patrick observed. Margaret walked slowly through the room, running her hand along the desks, envisioning the space filled with children. "It has potential," she agreed. "Though it could use a proper library, and those windows should have curtains to control the light." "Always the teacher," Patrick smiled. "Come on, let's head to the Mercantile. You can meet the Wilsons, and I need to pick up supplies." At the Mercantile, Margaret was introduced to Henry and Eliza Wilson, the proprietors, who greeted her warmly and expressed their hopes that Utica would finally have a permanent teacher. News of her arrival and the manner of it had already spread through town. "Riding double with Adam Adler, Mrs. Wilson exclaimed, her eyes twinkling. "That's the most excitement we've had around here in months." Margaret felt her face warm. It was merely a practical solution to an unfortunate situation. "Of course, dear," Mrs. Wilson nodded, not bothering to hide her amusement. Still, quite an introduction to Utica. As Patrick gathered his supplies, Margaret explored the Mercantile's offerings. It was well stocked for a frontier town, with everything from canned goods to fabric, farming implements to patent medicines. She was examining a shelf of books, mostly practical manuals, and a few well-worn novels when the bell above the door jingled. "Morning, Adam," Mr. Wilson called. "Got that order of nails you were waiting on?" Margaret turned to see Adam Adler stepping into the store, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. In daylight, she could fully appreciate what had been obscured by darkness and fatigue the previous night: the strong line of his jaw, the way his blue eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the broad shoulders that filled out his simple cotton shirt. His light brown hair was neatly trimmed, and though his clothes were those of a working rancher, they were clean and well-maintained. Adam's eyes found her immediately, a flicker of surprise crossing his features before he nodded in greeting. "Miss Kearney, good to see you settled in." "Mr. Adler," she replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than it felt. "Good morning." He crossed to where she stood by the bookshelf. "Checking our literary offerings. I'm afraid Utica's selection leaves something to be desired for someone accustomed to Boston's bookshops." "Every book has value to the right reader," Margaret said, gesturing to the shelf. "Though I do hope to establish a proper library if I'm appointed as teacher." "When not if," Adam corrected with quiet confidence. "Town council would be foolish to look elsewhere when qualified help arrives on our doorstep." Patrick joined them, extending his hand to Adam. "Adler, meant to come by later and thank you properly for helping my sister yesterday." "No thanks necessary," Adam replied, shaking Patrick's hand. "Your sister handled the journey with remarkable composure. Not many Eastern ladies would manage an 8-hour ride without complaint." Margaret felt oddly pleased by the compliment. "Necessity makes adaptable travelers of us all, Mr. Adler." A small smile touched his lips. "Indeed it does." He turned to Patrick. "How's that new well working out?" As the men fell into conversation about ranch matters, Margaret continued browsing. She couldn't help noticing how other customers entered and invariably deferred to Adam, seeking his opinion or simply acknowledging him with respect. It was clear he held a position of influence in the community that went beyond his status as a successful rancher. "Council meetings still on for Tuesday," she overheard Adam telling Patrick. 7 o'clock at the schoolhouse. Your sister should attend if she's interested in the teaching position." "We'll be there," Patrick assured him. As they prepared to leave the Mercantile, Adam approached Margaret once more. "Miss Kearney, I'm hosting a small gathering at my ranch this Sunday after church, just a few neighbors and friends. Nothing formal. You and Patrick would be welcome to attend. Might help you meet some of the families whose children would be your students." The invitation was delivered with such straightforward simplicity that Margaret found herself nodding before she could consider the social implications. "That's very kind, Mr. Adler. We'd be delighted." Something like satisfaction flickered in his eyes. "Good. Until Sunday, then." As they left the mercantile, Patrick gave Margaret a sidelong glance. An invitation to the AA, that's not something Adler extends lightly. "It's merely neighborly," Margaret replied, though she couldn't quite suppress the flutter of anticipation in her chest. Patrick helped her into the wagon, chuckling. "Neighborly, right." The next few days passed in a whirl of activity as Margaret settled into life at Emerald Hills. She helped Patrick with household tasks, learned the rhythms of country living, and began organizing her teaching materials and plans. Each evening, she found herself looking toward the distant Double-A ranch, wondering about its owner who had so unexpectedly entered her life. Sunday arrived clear and mild. After attending services at the small church in Utica, where Margaret was introduced to what seemed like the entire community, they returned home to change before heading to Adam's gathering. Margaret chose her best day dress for the occasion, a deep green that complemented her eyes and hair, with modest embellishments that struck a balance between Boston refinement and frontier practicality. She had just finished pinning her hair when Patrick knocked on her door. "Ready, Maggie." "Need to head out if we're going to make it on time." The Double-A ranch was even more impressive up close. The main house was built of squared logs with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Flower beds lined the front walk, and shade trees had been planted strategically around the property. Several wagons and horses were already there when they arrived, indicating a good turnout. Adam himself came out to greet them as Patrick helped Margaret down from the wagon. He was dressed in clean dark trousers and a white shirt with a vest, his usual cowboy attire upgraded slightly for the social occasion. "Welcome to the AA," he said, his eyes lingering on Margaret a moment longer than necessary. "Patrick, Miss Kearney, glad you could come." "Thank you for inviting us," Margaret replied, surprised at how genuinely pleased she was to see him again. Adam led them toward the house. "Nothing fancy, but folks around here don't get many chances to socialize outside of church and town meetings." The interior of the main house reflected its owner solid, unpretentious, yet revealing unexpected depths. Bookshelves lined one wall of the large main room, filled with volumes that made Margaret itch to explore their titles. Simple but good quality furniture was arranged to encourage conversation, and large windows captured views of the surrounding landscape. Adam introduced them to the other guests, neighboring ranchers and their families, the doctor and his wife, the pastor, and various townspeople Margaret had briefly met at church. She found herself warmly welcomed, though there were curious glances and the occasional knowing smile when Adam remained near her side for much of the afternoon. "Your library is impressive," Margaret commented during a quiet moment when they stood near the bookshelves. "Not what one expects to find in a ranch house." Adam ran his fingers along the spine of a leather-bound volume. "Books were my mother's passion. She taught school in Philadelphia before marrying my father. These were her collection, what I could bring west. She must have been a remarkable woman." "She was," he agreed, a shadow of old grief crossing his features. "Died when I was 16, influenza." "I'm sorry," Margaret said softly. "Both my parents are gone now, too. It leaves a particular kind of emptiness, doesn't it?" Adam nodded, studying her with those perceptive blue eyes. "It does." He pulled a book from the shelf, a well-worn copy of Thoreau's Walden. This was her favorite. She said Thoreau understood something essential about finding one's place in the world. Margaret smiled. "My father admired Thoreau as well. He used to say that true education begins with learning to see what others overlook." "Wise man, your father." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken when Mrs. Wilson approached with a plate of food, insisting they both eat something. The afternoon passed pleasantly, with music provided by a local fiddler, ample food contributed by all the guests, and conversation that ranged from cattle prices to territorial politics. As the gathering began to disperse with the setting sun, Adam found Margaret on the porch where she had stepped out for a breath of air. "Did you enjoy yourself?" he asked, joining her at the railing. "Very much. You have a lovely home, Mr. Adler." "Adam," he said quietly. "Out here, formality doesn't last long." She hesitated only briefly. "Adam, then, and I'm Margaret." He nodded, looking out over his land as the last light gilded the distant mountains. "What do you think of Utica so far?" "It's not what I expected," she admitted. "But I find I'm drawn to it more than I anticipated. There's a directness here, a clarity." "That's well put," Adam said, his voice warming with approval. "Nature doesn't allow for pretense, and people follow suit. Your worth is measured by your actions, not your pedigree or your bank account." "A refreshing change from Boston society," Margaret said with a small smile. Adam turned to face her fully. "You'll be at the council meeting Tuesday?" "Yes, Patrick says I should present my qualifications formally. They'll be impressed, I've no doubt." His confidence in her, despite knowing little of her professional background, was unexpectedly touching. "Thank you," she said simply. Then, gathering her courage, she added, "For everything, not just the ride to Utica, but for making me feel welcome here." Something shifted in his gaze, a warmth, an intensity that made Margaret's breath catch. "You belong here, Margaret. I knew at the moment you stood on that platform in Willowcreek, dusty and frustrated but not defeated." Before she could respond to this startling declaration, Patrick appeared at the door, announcing it was time to leave while they still had daylight for the journey home. As Adam helped her into the wagon, his hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. "Until Tuesday," he said. "Until Tuesday," Margaret echoed, a promise in the words that neither of them had spoken aloud. Tuesday evening arrived with a nervous flutter in Margaret's stomach as Patrick drove them to town for the council meeting. She had dressed carefully in a sensible navy dress with white collar and cuffs, professional without being ostentatious, which she judged would strike the right note with the practical folk of Utica. The schoolhouse was lit with oil lamps when they arrived, casting a warm glow through the windows. Several wagons and horses were already there, and the murmur of voices could be heard from within. Patrick squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You'll do fine, Maggie, just be yourself." Inside, the schoolroom had been arranged with the student desks pushed to the sides and chairs formed in a semi-circle facing the teacher's desk. About 15 people were present, mostly men but with a few women among them. Margaret recognized several from Adam's gathering and from church. Adam stood near the front of the room, deep in conversation with an older man with silver at his temples. He looked up as they entered, his face lighting with recognition. With a brief word to his companion, he crossed to greet them. "Patrick, Margaret," he nodded. "Glad you made it. Let me introduce you to Mayor Harrington." The older man Adam had been speaking with approached, extending his hand first to Patrick and then, with slight surprise, to Margaret. "Miss Kearney, heard a lot about you since your arrival." "All good, I hope," Margaret replied with a smile. "Indeed. Understand you're interested in our teaching position." The mayor's eyes were kind but evaluating, taking her measure. "I am, sir. I have my credentials with me, as well as letters of reference from the headmistress of the Boston Ladies' Academy where I taught for the past 2 years. Mayor Harrington nodded approvingly. "Excellent. We'll have formal introductions once the meeting begins, but I wanted to welcome you personally. Education's been a priority for our town council this past year." "Largely thanks to Mr. Adler's advocacy, I understand," Margaret said, glancing at Adam. "True enough," the mayor agreed. "Though getting a schoolhouse built was the easy part, finding someone willing to teach in it has proven more challenging." As the meeting was called to order, Margaret took a seat next to Patrick in the front row. Adam sat with the council members, 5 in total, including the mayor, the pastor, and 3 prominent citizens, one of whom was a woman in her 50s whom Margaret had met at church. Mayor Harrington opened the meeting with general town business reports on road repairs, a discussion about the need for a new well near the church, and plans for the upcoming Harvest Festival. Margaret listened attentively, getting a feel for the community's concerns and priorities. Finally, the mayor turned to the topic she'd been waiting for. "Now, as you all know, finding a teacher for our school has been a pressing concern. We've had interest from Miss Margaret Kearney, recently arrived from Boston, where she taught at a well-regarded ladies' academy. He gestured toward her. Miss Kearney, would you care to address the council? Heart pounding, Margaret rose and moved to stand before the assembled townspeople. She had prepared what she wanted to say, but looking out at their faces, some curious, some skeptical, some openly welcoming, she decided on a more direct approach. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I came to Montana to join my brother, but also because I believe in the power of education to transform lives and communities. I've taught for 2 years in Boston, primarily literature, history, and mathematics to young women aged 12 to 18. But my experience extends beyond that. I've also tutored children as young as 6, and I've worked with adult immigrants learning to read English." She paused, looking from face to face. "I understand the challenges of teaching in a frontier town. Children's help is needed for ranch and farm work, especially during planting and harvest. Winters make travel difficult, resources are limited, but these obstacles can be overcome with creativity, flexibility, and commitment." Margaret reached into her reticule and withdrew several folded papers. "I have my formal credentials here, as well as letters of reference. But more important than what's written on these pages is my promise to you. I will teach any child who wants to learn, regardless of age, background, or prior schooling. I will adapt to the needs of this community while maintaining rigorous standards. And I will stay not just for a season, but to build something lasting." A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. Margaret handed her papers to Mayor Harrington, who began reviewing them with the other council members. "Questions for Miss Kearney?" the mayor invited. Several hands went up, and for the next half hour Margaret fielded inquiries about her teaching methods, her experience with different subjects, her plans for organizing classes of mixed ages and abilities, and her views on discipline. She answered each with thoughtful candor, neither downplaying the challenges nor overstating her capabilities. Throughout the exchange, she was aware of Adam watching her, his expression attentive and approving. His confidence in her bolstered her own. Finally, Mayor Harrington called for a vote among the council members. It was unanimous in favor of offering Margaret the position. "Well then, Miss Kearney," the mayor said with a broad smile, "it appears Utica has found its teacher. The position pays $30 per month, with housing provided in the rooms at the back of the schoolhouse. School term runs from early September through late May, with breaks for Christmas and spring planting. Can you accept these terms?" Margaret felt a surge of joy and purpose. "I accept with gratitude. When would you like me to begin?" "School term officially starts next Monday," the mayor replied. "That gives you the rest of the week to prepare the classroom and review the enrollment list." After the meeting adjourned, Margaret found herself surrounded by well-wishers' parents eager to enroll their children, women offering to help prepare the schoolhouse, men discussing repairs needed before winter set in. The community's enthusiasm was palpable and deeply touching. When the crowd finally thinned, Adam approached, his expression warm with unguarded approval. "Congratulations, teacher," he said. "You impressed them all." "Thank you for your support," Margaret replied. "Patrick mentioned you've been the driving force behind establishing the school." Adam shrugged modestly. "Education matters. My mother taught me that." He hesitated, then added, "I have some books at the ranch that might be useful for your classroom. School primers, history texts, some literature." They were intended for the previous teacher, but he left before making use of them. "That would be wonderful," Margaret said eagerly. "The more resources we have, the better start we can make. I'll bring them by tomorrow," Adam promised. "And if you need help setting up the classroom or moving into the teacher's quarters, just say the word." Patrick joined them, clapping Adam on the shoulder. "Already putting my sister to work, Adler?" "She put herself to work," Adam replied with a smile. "I'm just offering to lighten the load." The three of them walked out into the cool evening air. Stars blazed overhead in a clear sky, and a nearly full moon cast silver light over the town. "Congratulations, Maggie," Patrick said, giving her a one-armed hug. "Knew you'd win them over." Margaret felt a deep contentment settle over her. In just 1 week, Her life had transformed completely from the structured routine of Boston to the wide, open possibility of Montana, from a woman seeking purpose to Utica's new schoolteacher. And then there was Adam Adler, the man who had quite literally brought her to this place in time, whose quiet strength and unexpected depth continued to intrigue her. As they said their goodbyes for the evening, his hand brushed hers briefly, perhaps accidentally, perhaps not. "Until tomorrow," he said softly. "Until tomorrow," she replied, carrying the warmth of those words with her all the way home. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity as Margaret prepared for the start of the school term. True to his word, Adam arrived at the schoolhouse Wednesday morning with 2 crates of books, a treasure trove that included McGuffey readers for various grade levels, arithmetic texts, a comprehensive history of the United States, several volumes of poetry, and classic novels in simple editions suitable for younger readers. "This is extraordinary," Margaret exclaimed as she examined the collection. "Where did you find these out here? Ordered them from Chicago last winter," Adam explained, helping her arrange the books on shelves at the back of the classroom. "Took months to arrive, but worth the wait." They worked together throughout the morning, Margaret organizing the classroom while Adam repaired a broken window latch and oiled the hinges on the stubborn front door. Their conversation flowed easily, moving from practical matters about the school to personal histories and philosophical discussions about education. "My father believed that books could take you anywhere," Margaret said as she arranged the readers by level. "Even when travel wasn't possible, he said the mind could still explore." Adam nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My mother had similar thoughts. She read to me every night adventures, histories, poetry, said it was as important as learning to ride or shoot." "She sounds wonderful," Margaret smiled. "I think we would have gotten along famously." "She would have admired you," Adam replied simply, the directness of his gaze making Margaret's cheeks warm. By midday, Patrick arrived with lunch he had packed for them, and the 3 ate together on the schoolhouse steps, discussing the upcoming term. "How many students do you expect?" Patrick asked. "Mayor Harrington gave me a list of 24 children between the ages of 6 and 16, Margaret replied. Though he mentioned some of the older boys might only attend sporadically, especially during busy seasons on the ranches. Adam nodded. "That's the reality here. But even limited schooling is better than none." In the afternoon, Margaret began moving her personal belongings into the teachers' quarters at the back of the schoolhouse, a modest 2-room apartment with a small bedroom and a combination kitchen and sitting area. It was simple but clean, with windows that looked out over a meadow behind the school. "It's perfect," she declared, placing her books on a small shelf beside the bed. "Close to my work, but with privacy as well." By Saturday, Margaret was fully settled into her new home and had completed her preparations for the first day of school. The classroom was arranged with desks grouped by approximate age and ability. Books were organized on the shelves, and lesson plans were written for the first week. That evening, as she sat on the small porch behind her quarters watching the sunset, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw Adam riding toward the schoolhouse, leading a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze on her forehead. "Evening," he called, dismounting with fluid grace. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Margaret replied, standing to greet him. "Just enjoying the quiet before the chaos of tomorrow." Adam smiled, tying both horses to the hitching post. "Brought someone I thought you should meet." He gestured to the mare. "This is Penny. One of the gentlest horses on my ranch and perfect for a novice rider." Margaret approached the mare cautiously. "She's beautiful?" "She's yours if you want her," Adam said. "On loan," he clarified when Margaret's eyes widened in surprise. "Teacher needs a way to get around, especially if you plan to visit some of the outlying families with children who can't make it to school regularly." "That's incredibly thoughtful," Margaret said, touched by his consideration. "But I don't know how to ride." "I can teach you," Adam offered. "Basic riding isn't difficult to learn, and Penny here makes it easy." He stroked the mare's neck affectionately. "What do you say, first lesson now before you lose daylight?" Margaret hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, I'd like that." For the next hour, Adam patiently taught her the fundamentals of horsemanship, how to approach the horse, how to mount and dismount safely, the proper way to hold the reins, and the basic commands. Margaret was an apt pupil, and though she was nervous at first, Penny's calm demeanor helped her gain confidence quickly. "You're a natural," Adam commented as Margaret successfully guided the mare in a wide circle around the schoolyard. "Hardly," she laughed, "but Penny is very forgiving of my mistakes." As the light began to fade, Adam helped her dismount for the final time. "We'll continue the lessons whenever you have time," he said. "Meanwhile, I'll have one of my ranch hands bring hay and oats for Penny, and there's a small shelter beside the schoolhouse that will serve as a decent stable." "I don't know how to thank you," Margaret said, looking up at him. In the golden light of sunset, his features seemed softer, more open. "Seeing you teach these children is thanks enough," he replied. "This town needs someone like you, Margaret." The way he said her name sent a pleasant shiver through her. They stood close together beside the horses, the evening air cool around them, fireflies beginning to appear in the meadow beyond. "Will you be at church tomorrow?" Margaret asked. Adam nodded. "I'll be there. Pastor Miller likes to remind me publicly when I miss a Sunday." His eyes crinkled with humor. "Perhaps after the service you might join me for dinner at the hotel to celebrate your first day of teaching on Monday." "I'd like that very much," Margaret replied, warmth spreading through her chest at the invitation. "Good." Adam's smile was gentle as he mounted his horse. "I'll see you tomorrow then." Margaret watched him ride away, Penny contentedly munching grass beside her. The Montana sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and a sense of rightness settled over her. In just over a week, this place had begun to feel like home in a way Boston never truly had. Sunday's church service was well attended, and Margaret received many well wishes for the upcoming school term. She sat with Patrick, but was acutely aware of Adam's presence several pews behind them. After the service, as congregants lingered to socialize, Adam approached. "Still up for dinner?" he asked, his hat in his hands, dressed in his Sunday best, a dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. "Yes, of course," Margaret replied, feeling Patrick's knowing gaze on them. "Take good care of my sister, Adler," Patrick said with a grin. "I've got business with Mayor Harrington this afternoon, so I'll head home later." The Silverton Hotel's dining room was modestly elegant by frontier standards, with white tablecloths and proper silverware. Adam led Margaret to a table by the window, pulling out her chair with natural courtesy. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked once they were settled. Margaret considered the question honestly. "A bit. First days are always challenging, establishing expectations, assessing abilities, learning 24 new names and personalities." "You'll handle it beautifully," Adam said with quiet confidence. Their conversation flowed easily through the meal, touching on books they both enjoyed, their respective journeys west, and their hopes for Utica's future. Margaret found herself laughing more than she had in years, drawn to Adam's thoughtful observations and dry wit. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured as they lingered over coffee. Adam nodded, his blue eyes intent on her face. "Why have you stayed in Utica? A man with your education and abilities could have settled anywhere, even returned east after the war." He was silent for a moment, considering his answer. "After what I saw during the war, I needed space, room to breathe, to think. I came west intending to keep moving, but when I reached this valley, something stopped me." His gaze drifted to the window, to the mountains visible in the distance. "There's a peace here I couldn't find elsewhere. And then, once I'd built something, there was purpose in making it better, not just my ranch, but the town too." "Building something that lasts," Margaret murmured, echoing her own words from the council meeting. "Exactly that." Adam's eyes returned to hers, warm with understanding. "What about you? What made you leave Boston when you had an established position there?" Margaret twisted her coffee cup slowly. "After my parents died, the city felt hollow. The social circles, the endless propriety, even the school where I taught it all seemed performative rather than purposeful." She looked up at him. I wanted to teach somewhere where education truly mattered, where it could change lives rather than simply polish what was already privileged. And do you think you've found that here? I believe I have, she replied with growing certainty. Or at least, I've found the place where I can try. As they walked back to the schoolhouse after dinner, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street. Adam had insisted on escorting her home, though it was only a short distance. "Thank you for dinner," Margaret said as they reached her door. "It was lovely." "Thank you for the company," Adam replied, his voice low. He hesitated, then added, "I've enjoyed getting to know you, Margaret." "More than I expected to." The simple honesty of his statement touched her deeply. "As have I." They stood for a moment in comfortable silence, something unspoken passing between them. "I should let you rest before your big day tomorrow," Adam finally said, though he made no move to leave. "Yes," Margaret agreed softly, equally reluctant for the moment to end. Adam reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. The touch was gentle but sent a current of awareness through her. "Good luck tomorrow, teacher," he said, squeezing her hand once before releasing it. "The children of Utica are fortunate indeed." With that, he tipped his hat and turned to go, leaving Margaret standing at her door with her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs and her hand still warm from his touch. Monday dawned clear and cool, a perfect September day for the start of school. Margaret rose early, dressed in a simple but professional blue dress, and prepared the classroom for her students' arrival. She arranged books on each desk according to the age groups she expected, wrote a welcome message on the blackboard, and placed a shiny red apple on her desk, a tradition her father had always observed on the first day of each term. At 8 o'clock, she rang the school bell, its clear tone carrying across the town and surrounding countryside. Within minutes, children began arriving, some walking from town, others riding in on horseback or brought by parents in wagons. Margaret stood at the door, greeting each child by name from the list she had memorized, matching faces to the names as they arrived. They were a diverse group, from the 6-year-old Sawyer twins with matching blonde pigtails to 16-year-old Thomas Wilson, who arrived on his own horse with a look that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. By 8:30, 22 of her expected 24 students had arrived and were seated somewhat noisily in the classroom. Margaret was about to close the door when she heard the sound of hooves approaching rapidly. A rider appeared at him, with a young boy of about 8 seated before him on the saddle. They pulled up to the schoolhouse, and Adam helped the child down. "Sorry we're late, teacher," Adam said with a smile that made Margaret's heart skip. "Young James here lives on the far side of my property. His parents are my ranch hands, and they were concerned about him making the journey alone." The boy, James, looked up at her with wide, nervous eyes. "Sorry, madam. You're right on time, James," Margaret assured him warmly. "We were just about to begin. Thank you for bringing him, Mr. Adler." Adam tipped his hat. "My pleasure. I'll be by to escort him home after school as well." He glanced past her to the classroom full of curious children. "Looks like you've got a full house." "Indeed I do," Margaret smiled. "Wish me luck." "You don't need luck," Adam replied softly. "But you have it nonetheless." As Margaret led James into the classroom and closed the door, she felt a sense of purpose and belonging stronger than any she'd experienced before. This was where she was meant to be, teaching these children, becoming part of this community, and perhaps, just perhaps, building something lasting with the remarkable man who had brought her here. The school term progressed with both expected challenges and unexpected joys. Margaret quickly discovered the wide range of educational backgrounds among her students, from children who had never held a book to those whose parents had taught them at home with surprising thoroughness. She organized the class into 4 groups based on ability rather than strictly by age, allowing each child to progress at their own pace while ensuring no one felt left behind. Word of her innovative teaching methods spread quickly through the community. Parents who had been skeptical about the value of education began to see changes in their children's newfound enthusiasm for learning, improved behavior, and practical skills that had immediate application in their daily lives. Adam remained a constant presence, not only bringing James to and from school each day, but also finding reasons to visit the schoolhouse on weekends, bringing additional books, helping with repairs, or simply stopping by to ask about her progress. Their friendship deepened through these encounters, each conversation revealing new layers of compatibility and mutual respect. Margaret found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that went far beyond mere friendship, though neither of them had spoken openly of deeper feelings. As October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color to the landscape, Margaret settled into a comfortable routine. She taught during the day, practiced her riding skills with Penny in the evenings, often under Adam's patient instruction, and spent weekends either at Patrick's homestead or exploring the area around Utica. One crisp Saturday afternoon in mid-October, Adam arrived at the schoolhouse with a proposal. "The weather's perfect today," he said, "and there's a place about an hour's ride from here that I think you'd enjoy seeing, if you're up for a longer ride than we've tried so far." Margaret had become a competent rider under his tutelage and found she genuinely enjoyed the activity. "That sounds wonderful," she agreed eagerly. "Let me change into something more suitable for riding." She emerged from her quarters a few minutes later, wearing her split riding skirt, a concession to practicality that had initially scandalized her Boston sensibilities, but now seemed perfectly reasonable for frontier life. With Penny saddled and ready, they set out together, riding side by side where the trail allowed. Adam led them through rolling grasslands, across a shallow stream, and finally up a gentle slope that opened onto a vista that took Margaret's breath away. Before them lay a broad valley, its autumn grasses golden in the afternoon light, with the snow-capped peaks of distant mountains forming a majestic backdrop. A ribbon of silver water wound through the valley floor, lined with cottonwoods and aspens whose leaves had turned brilliant yellow. "It's magnificent," Margaret breathed, reining Penny to a stop beside Adam's mount. "This is my favorite place in all of Montana," Adam said quietly. "I found it my first week here when I was still deciding whether to stay or move on. Sitting right where we are now, I knew I'd found home." They dismounted, and Adam spread a blanket on a flat rock overlooking the valley. From his saddlebag, he produced a simple picnic: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a canteen of water. "You planned this," Margaret observed with pleased surprise. Adam smiled. "Guilty as charged. Thought you might need a break from lesson plans and spelling tests." They ate companionably, watching the play of light and shadow across the valley as clouds drifted overhead. The air was cool but not cold, with the distinctive scent of autumn, earthy and crisp. "I've been meaning to ask," Adam said as they finished their meal, "will you be staying through the winter at the schoolhouse? Those quarters can get mighty cold when the snow sets in." "I hadn't thought that far ahead," Margaret admitted. "Is winter here as brutal as Patrick describes?" "Can be worse," Adam replied honestly. "The schoolhouse is sturdy enough, but that small stove won't keep up when temperatures drop below zero. Most teachers in these parts move in with a family during the coldest months." "I see," Margaret said thoughtfully. "I suppose I should speak with Mayor Harrington about arrangements." Adam seemed about to say something, then changed his mind, turning his gaze back to the valley. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the whisper of wind through the grass and the occasional call of a hawk circling above. "Thank you for bringing me here," Margaret said finally. "It's a piece of paradise." "I wanted to share it with you," Adam replied, his voice low. "There aren't many people who would understand why this place matters so much to me." Margaret turned to look at him, finding his eyes already on her face. "But you thought I would. I knew you would." The certainty in his voice warmed her more than the autumn sun. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of the connection that had been building since that fateful evening in Willowcreek. Adam reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear that had escaped from her pins. "Margaret," he said softly, his hand lingering at the side of her face. She leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "Yes, I find myself thinking about you at the most unexpected moments." When I'm mending fences or breaking horses or going over the ranch accounts, suddenly you're there in my thoughts. Margaret's breath caught at his honesty. I have the same experience, she admitted. You've become quite important to me, Adam. His smile was slow and gentle. May I kiss you, Margaret Kearney? Yes, she whispered. Please. He leaned forward, his hand cradling her face with exquisite tenderness, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, then deepened as Margaret responded, her hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel the steady beating of his heart. When they finally drew apart, Adam's eyes were bright with emotion. I've wanted to do that since I saw you standing on that train platform in Willowcreek, looking like you might take on the whole Montana territory single-handedly. Margaret laughed softly. I wanted you to, since about the same time. Adam took her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. I don't want to rush this, Margaret. What's growing between us is too important to hurry, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable and my feelings are genuine. As are mine, she replied, squeezing his hand, and I agree we have time to let this unfold as it should. They stayed on the hillside until the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, talking of hopes and dreams, sharing stories of their pasts, and discovering new layers of compatibility with each exchange. When they finally rode back to Utica in the gathering dusk, something fundamental had changed. A door had opened to possibilities neither had dared hope for just weeks before. News of their growing attachment spread quickly through the small community, as such things inevitably do. Margaret noticed knowing smiles from parents when Adam stopped by the schoolhouse, and her students occasionally giggled when his name was mentioned. But the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. The respected rancher and the dedicated teacher seemed a natural match in the eyes of Utica's residents. As October gave way to November, Montana's weather turned sharply colder. The first snow fell in the second week of the month, dusting the landscape with white that quickly melted in the daytime sun but signaled the approach of the harsh winter to come. At the November town council meeting, the question of Margaret's winter accommodations was raised. Those schoolhouse quarters won't do once December hits, Mayor Harrington stated matter-of-factly. We've had pipes freeze and burst in there the past 2 winters. The Wilson family has offered a spare room, one council member suggested. Before Margaret could respond, Adam spoke up. I have another proposal, if I may. All eyes turned to him. The foreman's house on my property is currently vacant since Jim moved to Idaho last month. It's a proper 2-bedroom home, well insulated, with a solid wood stove and proximity to help if needed during storms. Miss Kearney would be welcome to use it through the winter months. Margaret felt a blush rise to her cheeks at the immediate implications the townsfolk might draw, but Adam continued smoothly. My housekeeper, Mrs. Dawson lives in the main house and would provide proper chaperoning, and it's close enough to town that Miss Kearney could still reach the school on good weather days. On severe days when school must be canceled, she'd have safe shelter. Mayor Harrington nodded thoughtfully. Sounds sensible. Miss Kearney, would this arrangement suit you? All eyes turned to Margaret. She considered the practical benefits of Adam's offer as well as the propriety concerns. It's very generous, she said carefully, but I wouldn't want to impose. No imposition, Adam assured her. The house sits empty otherwise. After further discussion and with Patrick's approval sought and received, the arrangement was agreed upon. Margaret would move to the foreman's house on the Double Ranch by the end of November, with the understanding that on days when weather permitted, she would still conduct school. As they left the meeting, Adam walked Margaret back to the schoolhouse. The night was clear and cold, their breath forming clouds in the air. Thank you for your offer, Margaret said. It's a practical solution to a real concern. Practical, yes, Adam agreed, his voice low, but I won't pretend my motives are entirely selfless. Having you closer would mean seeing you more often, even when winter storms make travel difficult, Margaret smiled in the darkness. I thought that might be part of your reasoning. They reached her door and Adam took both her hands in his. I meant what I said about Mrs. Dawson providing proper chaperoning. Your reputation is important to me, Margaret. This community respects you as their teacher. I know, she said softly. I trust you, Adam, completely. He kissed her then, his lips warm despite the cold night air, conveying emotions that words had yet to fully express. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers for a moment. I'm falling in love with you, Margaret Kearney, he whispered. I think I have been since that first night. Her heart soared at his declaration. And I with you, Adam Adler. The final weeks of November were busy as Margaret prepared for her temporary move while continuing to teach. Adam and Patrick worked together to ensure the foreman's house was fully ready, checking the stove, repairing a leak in the roof, stocking the cellar with preserved foods for days when fresh supplies might be unavailable due to weather. The house itself was charming, a sturdy log structure with a stone fireplace, comfortable furnishings, and windows that looked out over a view of the mountains. It stood about a quarter-mile from Adam's main house, close enough for safety but far enough for privacy. This is lovely, Margaret exclaimed when Adam gave her a tour. Far more comfortable than my quarters at the school. Jim built most of it himself, Adam explained. He was with me from the beginning of the ranch, hated to see him go, but his brother needed help with his own place in Idaho. On the last Sunday of November, with snow beginning to fall more frequently, Margaret moved her essential belongings to the foreman's house. Patrick helped transport her things by wagon, while Adam ensured the house was warm and welcoming, with a fire already burning in the stove and a pot of misses. Dawson's stew simmering for dinner. You're all set, Patrick said as they brought in the last of her trunks, cozy as can be for the winter. He cast a knowing glance between Margaret and Adam. Just remember, Adler, that's my sister you're courting. I'm well aware, Adam replied seriously. And I respect her too much to do anything that would compromise her standing in this community. Patrick seemed satisfied with this answer. After ensuring Margaret was comfortable, he departed for his own homestead, leaving her alone with Adam for the first time in her new temporary home. Are you happy with the arrangements? Adam asked as they sat before the fire, mugs of hot coffee warming their hands. Very much so, Margaret assured him. It's perfect practical for the winter weather, but also. She hesitated, then continued honestly, also wonderful to be closer to you. Adam's eyes warmed at her words. Having you here on the ranch, it feels right, Margaret. It does, she agreed softly. The winter of 1878-1879 proved to be one of the harshest in Montana's recent history, with frequent blizzards and temperatures that dropped well below zero for days at a time. School was often canceled when conditions made travel dangerous, but Margaret made the most of the days when students could attend, packing in as much learning as possible on days when school was impossible. She found herself enjoying the unexpected gift of time reading by the fire, helping Mrs. Dawson with baking, and most precious of all, spending evenings with Adam when his ranch work was complete. Their courtship deepened during those winter months, their conversations ranging from philosophical debates about literature to practical discussions about ranch management to personal revelations about hopes and fears. They discovered a shared sense of humor, compatible values, and complementary strengths, her eye for detail balancing his big-picture thinking, his practical experience grounding her theoretical knowledge. Physical attraction simmered between them as well, kept in check by mutual respect and the propriety of their situation, but acknowledged in lingering kisses, and the way their hands sought each other's at every opportunity. Christmas arrived with a break in the weather, allowing the community to gather at the church for a special service and celebration. Margaret had worked with her students to prepare recitations and carols, and their performance brought tears to many eyes, including Adam's. "You've made a difference already," he told her as they walked back to the ranch afterward, the stars brilliant in the clear winter sky. "Those children are thriving under your teaching." New Year's Eve found them sitting before the fire in Adam's main house, Mrs. Dawson having retired early after preparing a special dinner for them. As midnight approached, Adam reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I have something for you," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. Margaret's heart quickened as he placed the box in her hand. "Adam." "Open it," he encouraged softly. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a delicate silver ring set with a small but perfect sapphire. "It was my mother's," Adam explained. "She left it to me, saying I should give it to the woman who captured my heart as completely as she had captured my father's." Margaret looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "This isn't a formal proposal, not yet," Adam continued, taking her hand in his. "I know we've known each other only a few months, but it's a promise, Margaret. A promise that my heart is yours, and when you're ready, I want to build a life with you." "Oh, Adam," Margaret whispered, deeply moved by his gesture. "I don't need more time to know what my heart wants." His eyes widened. "You mean yes," she said simply. "Whenever you decide to ask formally, my answer will be yes." Adam's face broke into a smile of such joy that it took her breath away. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of the future they would build together. As winter gradually released its grip on Montana and the first signs of spring appeared in early March, Margaret and Adam began making plans. They agreed to wait until the end of the school term in May for a formal engagement, with a wedding to follow in early summer. "The foreman's house," Adam said as they walked the property one mild Sunday afternoon. "We could expand it if you like. Add a proper kitchen, another bedroom or two, or if you prefer, we could build something new closer to the main house." Margaret squeezed his hand. "I love the foreman's house already. It feels like home to me. Expanding it would be perfect." As the snow melted and the landscape transformed from winter white to spring green, Margaret found herself falling even deeper in love not just with Adam, but with Montana itself. The vast skies, the rugged beauty, the resilient community of Utica all had worked their way into her heart. In late April, as wildflowers began to carpet the hillsides, Adam formally proposed during a return visit to the overlook where they had shared their first kiss. Kneeling before her with the valley spread out below them, he asked Margaret to be his wife, and she accepted with joyful tears. News of their engagement was met with enthusiastic approval from the community. Patrick, though wistful at the prospect of his sister living permanently at the Double instead of Emerald Hills, gave his wholehearted blessing. "Never seen two people better matched," he declared at the small celebration dinner held at the Silverton Hotel. The school term ended successfully in late May, with all but 3 of Margaret's students advancing to the next level of studies. The town council, delighted with her performance, unanimously voted to offer her a contract for the following year. "Teaching and being a rancher's wife might be challenging to balance," Mayor Harrington acknowledged, "but we're hoping you'll find a way to do both." "I intend to," Margaret assured him. "Education remains my passion, and these children deserve continuity." Their wedding took place on the first Saturday in June, 1879, with the entire town turning out for the celebration. The ceremony was held in Utica's small church, filled to capacity with friends and neighbors. Margaret wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Wilson had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a formal veil. Adam, standing tall and handsome in a new black suit, watched with undisguised adoration as Patrick walked his sister down the aisle. When they exchanged vows, his voice was steady and sure, while Margaret's trembled slightly with emotion. "I, Adam James Adler, take you, Margaret Elizabeth Kearney, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. I, Margaret Elizabeth Kearney, take you, Adam James Adler, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Pastor Miller pronounced them husband and wife, and as Adam kissed his bride, cheers erupted throughout the church. The celebration that followed at the Double Ranch was the largest gathering Utica had seen in years. Tables were set up on the lawn, laden with food contributed by every household in the community. Music, dancing, and laughter continued well into the night, a fitting beginning to a union that had captured the town's collective imagination. Later, as guests departed and quiet descended over the ranch, Adam led Margaret to their home, the expanded foreman's house that they had worked together to prepare over the past months. Renovations had added a larger kitchen, a second bedroom that could one day belong to a child, and a covered porch that wrapped around two sides of the structure. "Welcome home, Mrs. Adler," Adam said softly as he carried her over the threshold. "Home," Margaret echoed, her heart full to overflowing with love and gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this place and this man. "It really is, isn't it?" "From the moment you stepped off that train in the wrong town," Adam replied, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. "I think we were both finding our way home." Margaret reached up to touch his face, marveling at the path that had led them here. "Who would have thought a mistaken train stop could lead to such happiness?" "I would," Adam said, his blue eyes serious. "Because the moment I saw you standing there, something told me my life had just changed forever. And when I said I'll take you there, I think I already knew I was talking about much more than just a ride to Utica." "You were talking about this journey," Margaret whispered, "our journey." "One that's only just beginning," Adam agreed, lowering his mouth to hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of love, partnership, and shared purpose in the land they both now called home. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure to Adam and Margaret Adler. The Double-A Ranch prospered under their combined stewardship, Adam's practical knowledge of ranching enhanced by Margaret's meticulous record-keeping and strategic planning. The expanded foreman's house became their beloved home, filled with books, music, and eventually, the laughter of children. Margaret continued teaching at Utica's school, balancing her professional calling with her role as a rancher's wife with grace and determination. Under her guidance, the school grew in both size and reputation, eventually requiring the addition of a second teacher to handle the increasing enrollment as Utica itself expanded. Their first child, a son named William Patrick Adler after both their fathers, was born in the spring of 1880, bringing indescribable joy to their household and making Patrick an enormously proud uncle. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Elena Rose, whose copper curls and bright blue eyes combined the best features of both parents. Through Montana's harsh winters and glorious summers, through economic challenges and personal triumphs, their partnership deepened. Adam's quiet strength and unwavering support enabled Margaret to fulfill her potential as an educator and community leader, while her intelligence and compassion helped him build the Double into one of the territory's most respected ranches. By 1889, when Montana achieved statehood, Adam and Margaret had become pillars of the community. Adam served on the first state agricultural commission, while Margaret's innovative teaching methods had gained recognition throughout the region. Their children, now 9 and 7, were growing into thoughtful, capable young people who loved the land as much as their parents did. On a warm September evening in 1889, exactly 10 years after their first meeting, Adam and Margaret returned to the overlook that had become their special place. The valley below was bathed in golden light, just as it had been the first time he brought her there. 10 years, Margaret mused, leaning against her husband's solid form as they sat on the same flat rock where they had shared their first picnic. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stepped off that train in Willowcreek. Best mistake anyone ever made," Adam chuckled, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if the train hadn't broken down, if I'd arrived in Utica as planned?" Margaret asked, tilting her face up to his. Adam considered this for a moment. "I'd like to think we would have found each other anyway, but I'm grateful for fate's intervention." "As am I." Margaret leaned up to kiss him, still feeling the same thrill at his touch that she had experienced the first time their lips met on this very spot. When they parted, Adam reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box remarkably similar to the one that had held his mother's ring years ago. "What's this?" Margaret asked, surprised, "Open it," he encouraged, echoing his words from that New Year's Eve. Inside the box lay a pendant, a sapphire that matched her ring, set in an intricate silver design. "Adam, it's beautiful," she breathed. "Happy anniversary," he said, helping her fasten it around her neck. 10 years ago, I made the best decision of my life when I rode up to a frustrated, dusty, beautiful woman standing on a train platform and said, "I'll take you there." "And you did," Margaret replied softly, touching the pendant that now rested against her collarbone. "You brought me exactly where I needed to be." They sat together as the sun set over the Montana landscape they both loved, reflecting on the journey that had begun with a missed connection and led to the richest of lives built on love, purpose, and the shared commitment to creating something that would last long beyond their own time. And as darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, they made their way home to the ranch, to their children, to the life they had built together in this wild and beautiful land that had brought them to each other in the most unexpected of ways. For Margaret Adler, who had once stepped off a train in the wrong town, it had turned out to be exactly the right place after all.